Folks, I am your program director tonight. I'm Mike Morgan, the CEO of the Southern Africa, Canada Chamber of Commerce. That's quite a mouthful, so refer to us please as second chair. I've been called many things in my life, but people battle to get that right. So lovely to have you all here. The cloakers, if you need to go, it's just out there to my right. Please put your phones on silent, or preferably off. We are live streaming with your permission. We're very excited to have this opportunity. It's the first time we're doing it, so I'm holding thumbs. I really am. So there are people out there that are participating, and we're really, really grateful for that opportunity. Chinton, thank you so much. Where are you? There you are. Okay, so thank you very much for that. I think without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Ignatius Siguli, the CEO of KPMG. To welcome you officially to KPMG, and then also to introduce Professor Wiseman Nkuhlu. Ignatius, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you very much, Mike. Don't worry about your accounting. You'll be pleased to know that you're in good company. There's lots of people in KPMG who know very little about accounting. KPMG is not only about accounting, it's a lot of other things as well. So on that note, if you want to feel like changing jobs, come talk to me. Ladies and gentlemen, it is really our pleasure to welcome you here today. One little factor that you might not know, our global chair, Bill Thomas, is actually Canadian. So our friendship with Canada is a very long. Just a quick introduction of Prof. As it says there, he's my chairman, he's my boss, that I'm very proud to say. He's also a chancellor at the University of Pretoria. He was a vice chancellor and principal at the University of Transkei. So you see, he's got the academic background with a view of developing people. He was also the chairman of the Development Bank of South Africa. So you see the development strand running right through. He was also the economic advisor of President Thabo Mbeki. If you now have a look at all the charts that the economists chart, and you look at the history and see how the economy of South Africa performed in those years, you will see that it might not have been immediately evident at the time when things were happening, but you can see now with hindsight what a wonderful job was being done at that time. As passionate as he is, Prof, with the development of the profession, Prof was the first, and to my knowledge, still the only chairman of SAITA to have been requested to serve 2 terms. And he was also the first, and if I'm not wrong, again, to my knowledge, still the only chairperson of the Black Management Forum to be requested to serve 2 terms. So I think that just shows how valuable the development world sees his contribution. And as you know, he gets invited in a lot of fora in the continent to talk to the heads of states about how to go about in developing the country. Ladies and gentlemen, with those few words, I'll present to you Professor Wiseman Nkuhlu.
Yeah, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for your interest in joining the session this morning. I met Mike sometime last year. We were launching Bonan Mohale's book, Behold the Terror. And I was asked to make some remarks there. And as I was leaving, then he got hold of me and asked whether I would come and speak here. I would come and talk to the members of the Southern Africa Canada Chamber. And that's why we're here today. So I accepted that. And of course, he said he will not give me a topic, but he would like me to talk about the economy, South African economy. I've taken advantage of that, then thinking about, oh yeah, I forgot this thing. Sorry. This is one I was thinking. Yeah. Now I can get it to my book. Then in thinking about that, I said, probably I should comment on the recent two crises that we have been facing as a country. One is state capture and corruption. That has been really in the media and really got a lot of coverage through Justice Zondo's Commission of Inquiry. But I said the other crisis that we have been facing is COVID. Now, in my presentation this morning, I'm looking at, I'm commenting on the progress made by South Africa. I touched on our expectations in 1994 and say we made a good start. And then now we had the two crises. How does the country look as an investment destination post-COVID and post-state capture? And I must confess, in my thinking analysis, I'm influenced by two writers. So they're influencing me, but it's my ideas. But I'm very much influenced by Prof Nkuhlu, who is the writer of Why Nations Fail. So also Francis Fukuyama, he has just completed two big volumes on the issue of political development. So, but really, in the end, I look at development impact of COVID, development impact of state capture, and say, what are the big lessons regarding long-term growth in South Africa? And now, what are the challenges that we face now? And then where are we stationed? Whether Canadian investors should look at South Africa as a good investment destination. You'll see where I end. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. South Africa made a good start in 1994. The negotiated constitution provided a sound basis for moving the country away from the extractive political and economic institutions of the apartheid era. It also laid a foundation for an inclusive society that is founded on the principles of non-racialism, democracy, non-sexism, respect for human rights, and the rule of law. Fortuitously, from the very beginning, the first president of the new Democratic Republic of South Africa, President Mandela, demonstrated through his conduct and actions a strong commitment to treat all South Africans with love and respect, regardless of their historical backgrounds, and also to uphold the rule of law. This gave all South Africans confidence that the country was on a trajectory to inclusivity and a better future for all. His successor, President Mbeki, also genuinely championed equality, non-racialism and inclusivity, and respect for the rule of law. I keep on coming back to the rule of law. Much as he took a firm stand on the need to address the legacy of racial exclusion of Blacks from the mainstream economy and access to essential services like education, health, etc., and apartheid, his commitment to non-racialism and inclusivity was never in doubt. However, his distinctive contribution was his call to Africa and her people to take ownership and responsibility for their own development. The starting point being the call for an African Renaissance anchored on a renewed commitment to democracy, good governance, respect of the human rights on the one hand, and rapid economic modernization and integration on the other. Under the first two presidents, the pressure to adopt extractive political practices directed at repurposing the state to serve the interests of an exclusive inner elite was resisted. Of course, the pressure kept escalating, as we all know, under President Zuma, who took over the leadership of the party in 2007 and the country in 2009, the agenda for repurposing the state to serve the interests of an inner circle of loyalists at the expense of the country became fully blown and blatant. It took many of those who had supported his election by surprise. The inner circle soon marginalized the majority and methodically and ruthlessly placed its own people in key positions in government and state-owned enterprises, with instructions to execute the repurposing of institutions with the involvement of like-minded, corrupt private sector individuals and organizations. These developments clearly shifted the country in the direction of what Darren Acemoglu and James Robinson in their book, Why Nations Fail, define as extractive political and economic institutions, which they describe as follows. Extractive political institutions concentrate power in the hands of a narrow elite and place few constraints on the exercise of this power. Economic institutions are then often structured by the elite to extract resources from the rest of society. Extractive economic institutions thus naturally accompany extractive political institutions. The two authors delineate inclusive institutions as opposed to extractive institutions as follows: as those that allow and encourage participation by the great mass of people in economic activities, feature secure private property and unbiased systems of law and provision of public services that ensure a level playing field in which people can exchange and contract. In addition, they emphasize the political inclusivity, which entails pluralism and democracy. The campaign against state capture and corruption that has been ongoing in the country is the strongest objection by the majority of South Africans to the shift from inclusive to extractive political and economic institutions. The campaign is supported by a wide range of participants across racial, class, and political party divisions. It is the strongest indication that the majority of South Africans value the ideals and freedoms that are enshrined in the Constitution and are prepared to defend them with their lives. The COVID-19 pandemic emerged in the midst of the campaign against corruption and state capture and presented another challenge that South Africans had to confront as a united nation. In this presentation, I assert that the experience of navigating the two crises is going to have positive spin-offs. It is going to leave us stronger and more united as a country, as a consequence, better positioned to pursue a common agenda and a better future for all. Now, a few observations on the consequences, developmental consequences of the pandemic experience. The COVID-19 pandemic spread rapidly from the beginning of 2020, causing devastation and havoc in many countries, including South Africa. Governments found themselves compelled to respond with speed and impactful actions to contain the spread of the virus. There was no time for comprehensive consultations with stakeholders prior to actions being taken. Governments had to rely on their legitimacy and trust relationship with their citizens and affected stakeholders. Compulsory wearing of masks in public places, restrictions on the movement of people, and closure of businesses were simply announced without prior consultations. Citizens obeyed at the beginning, but later on, there were elements of rebellion to the erosion of personal freedoms that are regarded as sacrosanct in democracies. For South Africa, this was a very epoch-making experience. For the first time, we had to face a common enemy as South Africans, not as blacks or whites, rich or poor. We had to stand united as South Africans and to forget our differences. It was no small matter, given the fact that we are a young nation, less than 30 years old. We have not fought any wars together as a nation or confronted any major threats as a united people. Cyril Ramaphosa, as president of the country, understood and appreciated the Herculean task on his shoulders. He realized that for success against the pandemic, he had to win the confidence and support of all South Africans. He had to position himself as a trusted champion of what is good for South Africa and all her people. I'm certain that many South Africans would agree with me in saying that he fulfilled his role as president and leader of the country with distinction. His reliance on science as a basis for decisions and the fact that he worked very well with leading experts from all our universities and research institutions greatly enhanced trust in the government during the time of the crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, tragic as the COVID-19 pandemic experience has been, it also had positive spin-offs. It forced us to dig deep and tackle things that we should have addressed long time ago, but procrastinated because there were no triggers pushing us to act. One example is the forging of a compact between the government and the private sector to tackle the major challenges of unemployment, poverty, and inequality. The sudden loss of incomes and livelihoods by huge numbers of South Africans created a crisis that had to be addressed urgently to avoid disaster. This prompted intensive engagements between the government and the private sector, which culminated in a renewed compact to work together in restoring growth and employment post the pandemic. If you have any doubt about the renewed trust, I urge you to look or read what the president said during his State of the Nation address. This is what he said. We all know that the government does not create jobs, business creates jobs. He went further and said the key task of government is to create the conditions that will enable the private sector, both big and small, to emerge, to grow, to access new markets, to create new products, and to hire more employees. In my assessment, this is the strongest and clearest endorsement of business ever articulated by any of the presidents in the past. There's always been ambiguity about this relationship between government and the private sector. The president has also been consistent in mobilizing foreign direct investments through hosting investment conferences and other means. The tackling of red tape and other impediments to investments are now high priority on the agenda of the government. The second equally important positive outcome to emerge from the tragic experience of the pandemic is that we have responded with compassion and ubuntu towards the poor and the vulnerable in our country. The crisis forced us to act with urgency to alleviate the hardship of the unemployed youth in particular. Consultations and engagements that would have taken years under ordinary circumstances were concluded in a few months. Now, there is no turning back. We have to work together to find affordable, sustainable solutions. Lessons from state capture and corruption crisis. Again, I refer to the same authors, Darren Nkuhlu and Robinson, in the book I referred to earlier, Why Nations Fail, discuss at length the origins of extractive political and economic institutions in a number of developing countries, especially in Africa. They provide convincing evidence which shows that these institutions were first introduced by the empires, which include Britain, France, Spain, Portugal, Belgium, etc. All of them pursued similar agendas which were about extracting as much economic value as possible without investing in the building of efficient institutions to deliver services to local populations. Disappointingly, on attaining freedom, a number of liberation movements simply took over the institutions built by the colonialists and used them to enrich themselves and their inner circles. The leader of the liberation movement became the president and moved to the house of the former governor, and the members of his inner circle became ministers of state or heads of other state institutions. Their lifestyles changed very quickly. They adopted the taste of the colonial masters, did little to empower the masses of the people with quality education, scientific capabilities, and other public goods. Within a short time, they convinced themselves that they were the saviors of their nations. Ordinary citizens were too ignorant to understand the complexities of running a government. Over time, the circles became smaller and major decisions taken by these smaller groups to the exclusion of former comrades and voters who brought them to power in the first place. Another common trend was that as time went by, they became powerful and distrustful at the same time, treating whoever questioned their policies or conduct as a traitor. who should be locked or eliminated. At the height of this tragic situation, their preoccupation became sustaining themselves in these positions at any cost. The authors cite the following cases of extractive political institutions, which, of course, ladies and gentlemen, is the same that we face in South Africa, we call state capture. These extractive institutions. In South Africa, they end up being state capture. Now, in terms of citing the examples, countries that were extractive regimes, the first one that they cite is South Africa under apartheid, Sierra Leone under Stevens, Ethiopia under Mengistu, the DRC under Mobutu, all in the 1960s and 1990s. Unfortunately, there are more recent cases right on our doorsteps. Angola has been one. Zimbabwe has been one. I think this is, I'm sharing this, I'm trying not to deviate much from the written script. It's important that we don't see ourselves, this South African thing, as unique. You miss the plot if you don't see it in a broader context, so that you understand that in looking at solutions, you have to also take into account lessons learned from other countries. The authors further explain that once established, that is extractive institutions become self-perpetuating. Those who feel excluded fight the incumbents, not for the purpose of introducing democracy and accountability, but to grab the power for themselves to become the new beneficiaries of extraction. Francis Fukuyama, in Political Order and Political Decay, points out that in developing countries, the risk of extractive institutions becoming prevalent is increased by the absence of a middle class that is well capitalized and independent. This is definitely the case in Africa, including South Africa. The educated people who become politically active are unskilled and semi-skilled. Unskilled and semi-skilled workers, teachers, nurses, medical doctors, lawyers, etc. They have middle class tastes and aspirations, but have no capital or assets to prosper on their own. On attaining freedom, they expect the government to give them jobs and business opportunities. In developed countries, the middle class is to a large extent not dependent on government, and therefore in a stronger position to hold politicians accountable. However, the peculiar circumstances of the educated masses in developing countries make them susceptible to incipient corruption, which in some cases become fully blown and culminates in state capture, as we've experienced in our country. There's no doubt that the repurposing of state and its institutions that gained momentum from 2009 onwards was definitely going to entrench the politics of extraction in South Africa. The politics of the country were going to attract more greedy, egoistic politicians whose motives for forming political parties and contesting elections would be simply to remove incumbents in order to create opportunities for their own members to become the new beneficiaries of extraction. This is what has happened in a number of countries that continue to be mired in poverty and underdevelopment after decades of freedom. Some end up being failed states. South Africa was saved from this calamity by the presence of the Gupta phenomenon in the politics of extraction. What united South Africans against the politics of extraction, that is state capture and corruption, to be more specific, was the realization that complete outsiders foreigners for that matter, with no liberation credentials, had taken over the country and were manipulating the president and the state for their own benefit. This is what enraged South Africans across the board, including staunch members of the ruling party, the African National Congress. Yes, the constitution of the country and the institutions of democracy, in particular the office of the public protector and the judiciary, played crucial roles. But what took the entrenched loyalty of the Black elite to the party that had led the struggle against colonialism and apartheid was the feeling of betrayal by the president and his close allies. This is what brought the country, this is what has brought the country to a critical juncture that is a turning point, which Nkuhlu and Robinson described as a major event or confluence of factors disrupting the existing economic or political balance in society. In our case, a broad coalition of progressives suddenly became a reality. The appointment of a commission of inquiry into state capture and corruption happened as a consequence of the emergence of a new coalition made up of staunch members of the ANC and other liberation movements, as well as simple liberals and concerned South Africans who just want decency and justice. I was going to pause it for just for a minute. The point I'm making here, I'm saying like in a number of countries where state capture and corruption continued for generations, we're at a risk of that happening in this country. As long as the people who were doing the extraction were people with liberation credentials who would have tolerated this. What really made it intolerable was the fact that there was a foreigner, a person who would know, and then, in other words, to break the solidarity of the ANC, it is that broke that solidarity. It is the fact that there was a so, in a way, it's not too bad that there was a good person. You know, political extraction can continue forever. Look at what is happening in Nigeria, but I'll leave it at that. You can pass him from one general to the next general. He does the same thing. He gets out of office, he's a billionaire. Keeps on and on. And then the cycle, he goes in with his own cycle, they get rich and get out, and another 10, it's another. It goes on forever. But in our case, the solidarity of the blacks behind the party that brought liberation has been broken because they were betrayed by their own, one of their own. So I'm saying as a result of this development, the politics of our country have radically changed. Citizens are demanding integrity and accountability from the politicians. Blind loyalty for historical reasons is fading. Above all, the people demand that all those implicated in state capture and corruption should be prosecuted and those found guilty jailed. The greatest positive impact, of course, is that as a result of what the country has gone through, the risk of politics of extraction becoming entrenched has been significantly reduced. South Africans are now much more vigilant and will not tolerate any political party that has an agenda to enrich its leaders through cadre deployment and illegal or unfair allocation of government tenders. Above all, the Constitution and the rights enshrined therein will henceforth be more treasured and defended, not only by the courts, but also by ordinary South Africans. Now I'm saying, against this background, I think there's a great opportunity for the country to take off. Against this background, therefore, I think now is the time for bold actions to remove blockages to economic growth, empower the citizens to be the agents of their own upliftment, as well as provide infrastructure and services that are the responsibility of the government more efficiently and effectively. In the State of the Nation address, the President made very encouraging pronouncements on key priority areas. He made clear and specific commitments to remove obstacles to investments, promote collaboration with the private sector in the financing and implementation of high-priority infrastructure projects, remove red tape to unblock development and growth of small and medium enterprises, as well as roll out essential infrastructure in rural areas. But of course, he talked also about reforms in the rest of government. Beyond business, there were announcements to build state institutions, to rebuild state institutions and state-owned enterprises. We know that this is going to be difficult and complex, but there is a way and to make a start. These are all welcomed initiatives, but the elephant in the room is the capacity of the state. Building the capacity of the state should be top priority. All studies and authorities on development, including the ones that I've mentioned, highlight a capacitated, competent, and trustworthy bureaucracy as an important pillar to successful modernization and development. Of course, even studies of successful countries, including Japan, South Korea, Singapore, and more recently China, provide irrefutable evidence about the importance of a competent, capable, professional bureaucracy. Commenting on this point, Francis Fukuyama in Political Order and Political Decay assessed that there are three basic categories of institutions that constitute a political order. First, the state; second, rule of law; and thirdly, mechanisms of accountability. He also points out that successful political and economic development is dependent in having all three in a coherent, balanced manner. In the case of African countries, he highlights the lack of strong, modern, and capable state and the absence of the rule of law as major deficits that hold Africa back. Unfortunately, I do not believe that this is adequately appreciated by the current government and even by the opposition parties. The tendency is to think that by simply getting rid of corrupt officials and appointing better qualified individuals, the problem will be solved. It is much deeper and complex than that. The whole state has to be reconfigured and branches redefined. To understand what needs to be done, I encourage you to study the experiences of the countries that I mentioned earlier on. Yeah, much as the announcements by the president are appreciated, the capacity of the state to unlock blockages is doubtful. ESCOM, Transnet are a major concern. It is also not clear that all the ministers have the political will and competence to lead the required reforms. The justice system is also a source of concern. A number of state-owned institutions are dysfunctional or bankrupt. Hence, the doubts that the promised actions will be implemented. Without competent execution by government, the country will not achieve the required economic growth and job creation. All in all, the country is well poised to take off post-COVID-19 and state capture, but it depends on delivery of promises by the government. Well, unfortunately, weak state capacity is not the only elephant in the room. The second is a lack of appreciation of the fact that it is education and scientific and technological capabilities that are the real determinants of economic growth and development. On this point, Yuval Harari in Sapiens, that is a brief history of humankind, says the following. He talks about discovery of ignorance. He says this discovery of ignorance, it is this discovery of ignorance that placed the Western countries ahead of civilizations that were more advanced than the West up to about the 15th century. He says the West got ahead because of breakthroughs in science, scientific thinking, and inventions in engineering, transport, medicine, weapons of war, and much more during the 16th and 17th centuries. This led to the Industrial Revolution and mass production of weapons that enabled the West to conquer the rest of the world. Commenting on this point, a writer from Singapore, Kishore, comments as follows. The New Age, the book is the New Asian Hemisphere. It says until about the 17th and the 18th centuries, Asian scientific development was almost on par with Europe. Then with enormous bursts of creativity in the field of science and technology, Europe leapt ahead. This is also true of the Middle East and China. For centuries, they were ahead of Europe. But this changed suddenly during the 17th and the 18th centuries. Yeah, for me, acknowledging this fact is an important step out of ignorance. The first non-Western country to unashamedly acknowledge that a gap in science and technology between itself and Europe had developed, and that if it is not addressed quickly, it will be colonized, was Japan. Other Asian countries that subsequently prioritized education and scientific and technological developments are the so-called Asian tigers, South Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. Of course, in the last 40 years, we have seen China making unprecedented scientific and technological advances within a very short time. I'm afraid in our case, we have not taken even the first step. We treat education and the development of scientific thinking and capabilities as if it is just another service that the government should provide. There is no appreciation of the fact that the most revolutionary change should be in transforming our people through high-quality education, scientific advancement, integration of scientific thinking and capabilities. This is the ticket to the 21st century. Otherwise, we'll remain just consumers of modern technologies. Without the requisite capabilities, economic growth of our country will remain pedestrian, and the underclass of the unskilled school dropouts and university graduates with no relevant skills will continue to grow. At the launch of Bonang Mohari's book, Behold the Titan, I commented as follows. Have we not grasped the basic truth? That is, it is only when the masses of ordinary people are empowered with economic freedom, quality education, and relevant technical skills, together with the requisite financial and technical support to engage in their own economic activities, that dignity-enhancing economic participation and development becomes possible and self-sustaining. In my assessment, this is the most binding constraint to sustainable high economic growth in our country and to solving unemployment, poverty, and inequality. Unfortunately, we seem to be blind to its gravity. A short conclusion. In conclusion, I just again crystallize some of the points that I've already dealt with, but I'm just going to be very short. Ladies and gentlemen, the two crises have helped us mature as a nation. Having experienced state capture and rampant corruption, South Africans appreciate much more keenly that politicians should be held to much higher standards of accountability and ethical conduct. As a consequence, the country is experiencing real political realignment, which is going to improve the quality of our politics. Above all, now there is higher appreciation of the fact that the law should apply equally to all. Even more importantly, the experience has significantly reduced the risk of the politics of extraction being entrenched in our country. Moreover, the relationship between big business and government has been reset. Leading business organizations have taken a strong stand against corruption and are openly calling on their members to conduct themselves ethically and to ensure that their activities do not cause harm to society. In addition, professional organizations, including accountants, auditors, and lawyers, have been subjected to close scrutiny. Going forward, they need to review their conduct or risk increased regulation. Another inevitable outcome from the crisis has to be the renewal and strengthening of a number of government institutions and agencies, including the justice system, intelligence, and state-owned enterprises. Well, these are all positive developments. However, as I pointed out, in the short term, there is uncertainty on a number of fronts. Government's ability to deliver on its undertakings is a major concern. Actions on the findings and recommendations of the Commission of Inquiry chaired by Chief Justice Zondo is another. There are also concerns about the stability of the government in the period leading to the next national elections. However, despite all these caveats, the country is not about to collapse. And it will make tentative progress in the short term. There will be increased investments in infrastructure and improved economic growth. However, the country will continue to perform below its potential. And this is my analysis. This is where we are. For well poised, there's going to be better growth than we have had in the recent past, but we're not going to be at our potential because of the binding constraints that I've referred to. So you as potential investors, if you are invested in this country, I advise you to stay, because we've dealt with the big elephants that have destroyed African countries. This issue of the rule of law, the issue of extractive politics being entrenched, those things are behind us. And we've broken also the feeling that dominates the liberation parties, that they can do no wrong. All those things are behind us, or well settled. And I believe that the politics of our country are being much more aligned in terms of economic policies. I'm sure the DA is worried about the economic policy statements of the ANC, because there's so much alignment now about what should be done to get the country on the move again. Well, thank you very much. I look forward to having a conversation with you. Thank you again for the invitation.
If you'd like to take the questions from your seat here, I think we could comfortably do that.
Okay.
We can do that. We have 2 roving mics, so I'll take them around and start framing your questions.
I think it's better understand.
Better unmute it, I think, Sean. I want to stand in.
Yeah.
Well, we heard frequently the term accountability, reference to extractive politics. And I think we need to reflect on just how seriously those issues impact the way forward. And it's incumbent upon all of us to reflect deeply and make a difference. It never ceases to sadden me that we create platforms such as this, where people have the opportunity to listen to robust, well-researched, credible information and analyses, and we don't always make full use of the opportunity. So I implore you, when these forums are created and established, that you make use of them, that we can really draw and listen to people like Prof Nkuhlu, the Nkuhlu of this world, and there are so many more. And personally, I draw a lot of strength and confidence and courage that we're in good hands, Prof. So thank you. Questions, please. Who wants to kick off? Surprise, surprise.
Thank you, Prof, for that good information there. I guess my question is, do we potentially have a catch-22 situation at the moment? Government and business needs to work together. However, if you take it that government has put corruption behind them, is there not still some concern about interacting with business and the perception that may be created by talking to business in that process? And in that process, you end up with a little bit of paralysis because they are concerned to be seen to be getting too close to business with the history of corruption we've had.
Well, yeah, no, there must be an element of that. But really, I've been closely involved with business leadership South Africa, for instance, on the whole question of working on reconstruction post-COVID. And the number of times that this engagement took place at the level of ministers and also the president. And also business, especially BUSA, has taken a very strong stand on the issue of holding their members accountable on corruption issues. To me, if you look into this thing in the historical context, the ANC and all the liberation movement were very suspicious of business immediately after 1994. And President Mandela fought hard to bring business closer, and the bulk of the ANC was opposed to that. And then President Mbeki also worked hard, and those forums bringing foreign direct investments, giving the attraction of foreign direct investment, the same project as Ramaphosa is doing now. But I think the President Ramaphosa has gone much further in making history that he was making in Parliament. He's challenging his own constituencies, that this is the future. We must accept that as government, we cannot create jobs. We must work. We must have improve the relationship between us, government, and the president. So, in terms, if you look at it in the historical context, we're better positioned now than we've ever been to have business and government working closer together. And of course, to me, it doesn't even matter which party is in power, because ANC or a coalition between the ANC and DA or something like that. But I think the fact that business now, the legitimate of business is much more accepted now than in the past. That is going to be the case going forward. So I think the private sector is also, as you are aware, has been very bold in saying to the government, if you want assistance in raising funds to meet the cost of prosecuting those who are business people who are implicated in corruption, who are prepared to make a contribution. That's a bold step by business. So, yeah, there may be concerns, but I think we're better placed than we've ever been as a country to forge ahead. All countries are actually developed. No country has ever developed without this close relationship, collaboration between government and the private sector. So we were better placed than we've ever been.
Thanks for that, Prof. Any more questions? The opportunity, here we go. Here we go.
Thank you so much, Prof, for the talk as well. And being a scholar yourself, and the Chancellor, I'm an East London boy, so Eastern Cape is where my roots are. And I worked with lecturers and I worked with the institutions, University of Transkei, Fort University is where I graduated, and I'm funded there for my PhD. But with that case, how do you see the country with an education gap now moving, where the education minister comes to the party and says, we want to teach in the native language, but obviously the language, there's a language barrier when we get to the tertiary institution, and lecturers then, while we're bilingual and we communicate in both languages, the transition from a university state to a corporate world has become a huge challenge, particularly for my peers as well, that I've studied with in the Eastern Cape. So from your perspective, how do you see us basically managing that gap and fulfilling that gap too? Because if we run with the scenario that, yes, jobs are going to be created and we're going to boost the market for employment in youth, how do we bridge that gap now? That might be a language barrier to break into the corporate.
Yeah, no, it's more than just a language issue. You know, I'm saying that we have not grasped the gravity of this thing. But really, what the greatest differentiator between countries that have managed to develop and achieve high achievement and sustain high levels of growth is the extent to which they have managed to build the productive capacity of their people through quality education and skills and so on. We don't seem to get it here. You know, we keep on saying that the good thing is to improve the matric results and lower the pass mark. All the time. So we are not about knowledge and capabilities. It's a show that yes, South Africa is so many people. It's very sad. If we continue on this path, even this thing about education of our languages, politically it does make sense, but you must ask yourself, what are the main objectives of the country? What should really drive our policies? The fact of the matter is that if you look at Black people in particular, Africans, the majority of them are in the townships, are in rural areas. Quality of education there has not improved. It's deteriorated. There's lack of, so we are continuing to build an underclass there. And then we blame apartheid. It's us who continue that. And the few, we're just looking at the few of us who can manage to go to so-called modern C schools and private schools. And when you look at the 28,000 out of 700,000 candidates who write matric, and possibly only less than 30,000 of them write mathematics. If you dig deep, you will find that possibly 80% can come from private schools and that schools. So this thing, you know, people can find themselves confused and think that they are being politically correct, talking about the right to be taught in indigenous language. But if you want to deal with this thing that I'm talking about, what is going to happen when you talk about the fourth industrial revolution? When you have no mathematics, you're not teaching mathematics to children are getting more backwards, and you're not teaching science, and you are. So to me, that's a crisis. So we should, yeah, we've allowed ourselves in education to be bogged down in things that are not important, and we miss the whole point. It's time that I listen to political parties and also listen to president or listen to important debates about economic growth and us going forward this country. I always watch who's going to say something about education and this scientific productive capacity of people. It's that in passing towards the end. It's not a priority for any of the political parties. President said great things in his speeches. But all what he was saying that the thing that will move our economy from growing at 1% possibly 3%. And think of it, if our economy can grow by 3% or 5%, how many years will it take to absorb 35.3% people unemployed or 6%? They will never be absorbed. You need things that are much more radical than what we're doing now. And the thing is empower our people with and invest that. There's nothing more that can be more important than that. Well, I don't want to bore you, but I touch here to what Harari says about discovery of ignorance. When, as people, you know, Japan was the first non-Western country to say, why suddenly these people from Europe have got these powerful weapons and I can't fight them? So they said, no, possibly the trick is not just getting the weapons. Let's find out the ideas that make it possible for them to produce people. The idea, or the scientific ideas, and so on. And they did the same thing. They transformed their education and everything. The rest is history. And we were colonized with all kinds of things under apartheid. Why apartheid regime made sure that they deprived black people of quality education, and now we're free. We don't see this thing that they think that is important to differentiate us. That is going to have this education and productive scientific capacity of people. So I'm afraid this thing to me, I've been listening to the debate about language, but to me it's not strategic at all.
Thanks very much, Prof. Prof, are you good for another one question? I think I'm
fine.
Sure. Are we good?
That's
Thank you. Thank you, Prof. Now, you've given a bit of an optimistic view of the future, but a lot of business people and just the general population that we talk to often say they feel like South Africa is becoming another Zimbabwe. I talked to some very smart Zimbabweans who say the same thing. They say it started like this, then the pothole came, then that came, and then eventually we got to where they are now. Now, we know that some of the differences are that structurally South Africa is more sound, we've got stronger institutions, we've got an independent judiciary, and so we're a lot safer than Zimbabwe was because those things were captured. So it's not exactly the same context. But when how would you reassure business people like us that we're not going to become the next Zimbabwe when the Zimbabweans that we know are telling us that they've seen us go down the same path and we're experiencing that for ourselves?
Yeah, no, I made the point about the experience in this country, state capture. The fact that what really allowed extractive politics for state capture by a small group to persist for generations in other countries. It is the thing of the loyalty of the ruling party, of the people who think that they liberate, or actually not, they think they did liberate the country. Who liberated the country, feeling that blindly loyal supporting their leaders and finding it very difficult to disagree with those leaders, and therefore the policy of extraction continue, even when there's a change of leadership. It's just the president anointing somebody else, and those policies continue. And I feel that in South Africa, this has been broken. This has been broken. I strongly feel that it has been broken. Because if the ANC tries to, President Ramaphosa has moved away from those politics, definitely, and is taking the risks of taking over in a different path. If the ANC can make a mistake, and the old politics of the liberation movement can do no wrong, they find a way of replacing him. I'm telling you, the DA and other parties will rule this country in no time. So we cannot go back to that. We're not going to go back. So for me, that gives me confidence that we're not going to be another Zimbabwe. And also, I feel that I'm of the view that having experienced the damage that can be caused by corruption and allowing a small minority to really abuse power in the country, the damage that can be caused by that. And also, I think the damage that can be caused by this kind of politics is also appreciated now, not only by the educated elite. If you look at Zimbabwe, it's not only because the resident of Harare or Bulawayo. Yeah, it's going to be much broader than that. As you can see, this loyalty, blind loyalty to the party that liberated the country is being broken in the Eastern Cape, in Cape Town, in Johannesburg, and now in KwaZulu-Natal. So I think what's going to happen, there are signs of that give me a lot of comfort. The fact that the DA in taking over Johannesburg and Pretoria, they have done something that possibly the ANC knew that it had to be done, but they never had time to do it because it was loyal to comrades. Called on government offices to pay their dues, and if they don't, they close them down. That is going to be repeated by ANC government. When they go, they're not going to allow lawlessness to continue. So really, politics, of course, they don't go through in straight lines. There are going to be some disturbances in the short term, but South Africa is on a different path. I have no doubt in my mind. We're struggling, for instance, now to deal with the issue of communities struggling with Africans from other countries and so on. Because the reason we're struggling, it has to do with the balancing of our commitment to our constitutions and human rights. And also, how do we deal with that? And also the hardship that is being experienced. But it doesn't mean that the country is going to collapse. So for me, there are things that have taken place. When I talked about a critical junction, that critical junction, to me, we have arrived at. And the policy of the country, I know the direction that we're taking was definitely likely to take us in the same direction as Zimbabwe and other failed countries. But the fact that we experienced the state capture and forced us to take the steps that we've taken to say that we'll not allow this thing to happen again. I think to me, it's a different trajectory. In the short term, the uncertainty, but we are on a different path to a better future. We're not going to be another failed state. Our politics are going to be better than Nigeria, are going to be better than all the states where the president can do as he likes and get away with it.
Thanks so much, Prof. I think
there's one hand, yes.
we take instruction from our leadership. Last one, Craig. Prof, you will be available afterwards. I'm sure that some people are very conscious that some people might want to engage on a one-on-one basis afterwards. You happy, Prof?
Just want to squeeze one more question. I just want to hear your take on the Black economic transformation policy. The myth that it discourages the foreign direct investment. And I just want to know how can we implement this so that both parties are well equipped or favor everyone and is implemented accordingly.
Yeah, you know, in my assessment, this is also linked to this education thing and scientific population. Had we in 1994 given high priority to getting young South Africans, first of all, do that mathematics right in the lower schools and English and so on, get quality education right. And then arrange with a number of overseas universities to take our matriculants in big numbers so that we'll be now having scientists, engineers, you know, we will not be short of skills in every country. So had we done that, this thing about Black economy would not be a problem at all, because you know, it will be in the interest of business coming from overseas to employ and partner with local guys, because they'll be well equipped in terms of skills, in terms of everything. So there's something structurally that we failed to address, and now you have this thing. And of course, the other complication about Black economic empowerment is the fact that this phenomenon of gender inconvenience that has come up. So it's very confusing to business people, I'm sure, to know whether they're dealing with a genuine person or not. And then it's just muddy the waters and so on. But I'll just stop there. But really, to me, the fundamental issue, if you wanted to restructure and democratize the economy, you should have done the right thing about education. It's never too late, even now. I still believe that. But unfortunately, I get very disheartened by the fact that when you listen to the best political leaders, this thing of really scientific and educational capacity of people is never done. They never talk about it. And then when they talk about it, they just get excited about it with matric results and keep on finding ways of lowering the Well, thank you very much.
Now, our privilege to take public on this conference. Give the time question and no problem. The program
Project management. Thanks, everyone. Thank you to thanks to Prof Nkuhlu. As always, I'm blown away every time I hear you speak. You shine that light of reason through the smog of disillusion, which I think a lot of us feel the weight of in our everyday lives. Thank you also to Ignatius. I really value the conversation we had just before the events with the focus on social development. And I think Prof encapsulated that in a lot of his discussion today. Thanks to KPMG for hosting us in this lovely auditorium, and just I think as always for a quality event. There were lots of insights today. My mind was reeling, but unusually for me is I leave this event feeling optimistic. I know who was it? You said it's all, someone said all very, very positive, but I actually feel optimistic because I feel like there's a way forward. Our questions or our concerns have been addressed. I feel like COVID, as devastating as it is, the fact that business and governments have come closer together is such an important step forward, that there's a new compact for how we're going to move our nation forward. Yes, there are challenges around state capacity. I mean, the issue around that productive scientific capacity. I agree with you. It's imperative that we get that right. And the way we do that, is also to focus further down the food chain, the matric results. Crazy to focus there. Can we not focus on early childhood development? Can we not capacitate the under fives with the right nutrition, with the right stimulation? That's how we're going to move everything forward. What was really valuable to me as a South African today also is I've got a sort of renewed or a reset of the focus on our constitution. I think we all get so inured into believing that it's a compilation of intentions. It's not. It's something we should all be living every single day. It's not just about the principles of inclusivity or non-racialism or rule of law, as important as those are. It's a guiding light for us of accountability, to our country, to each other, to ourselves. And I, for one, I'm so grateful to have that reset for me to, that staleness that we sometimes get with all the bad news. Today, I feel like it's been lifted. So thank you to everyone. This has been a wonderful event. Thank you.
Tom, Dudu, I think we've got 12 minutes for chatting outside until 12:30, really hard close at 12:30. But on a more personal note, and also on behalf of SACMG, I would like to extend my personal thanks to Team KPMG. Shah, Dudu, Nkuhlu, you were absolutely amazing. From the first time we engaged, the level of efficiency, professionalism just shone through. So for me, it was really a privilege to visit KPMG with our team from SACMG, my members and partners. So my profound thanks to you, Shah, Dudu, Nkuhlu, and Team KPMG for making this possible. Thank you.